Hi, thank you for joining us today for getting started with metadata and taxonomy in SharePoint. I'm Sudha, I'm a PM on the SharePoint team, and I have Anupam with me today.
Hi, I'm Anupam. I'm a PM on the SharePoint team, and thank you for joining us.
We are going to be talking about a very important and interesting topic of enterprise information architecture and how SharePoint can help your organization build a great IA and make the most of your business processes.
So, what is enterprise information architecture? Simply put, enterprise IA is a set of rules, requirements, principles, guidelines, and models used to describe both the current and the future state of your information assets. An information asset can be technical documents, business content, or organizational processes. In short, any digital asset required for your business to run successfully. Having a good IA in your enterprise is critical to ensure your business processes run both efficiently and successfully. Here's why. A good IA ensures you and your team have a shared understanding of the information and its structure. So now, when you're discussing a particular topic, you all are truly speaking in the same language. Having a consistent structure and processes also mean that the change management is simpler, which means whether you're onboarding a new project, customer, product, or a team, or you're migrating from an old process to a new process, you have a definite path and a specific set of pre-existing tried and tested rules that you can utilize. When everyone in your organization knows exactly how to find or discover content and how to understand and reuse it, it drives an increase in productivity. This also ensures there is a reduction in the duplication of content and hence reducing the maintenance cost for the organization as well.
So, hopefully, you're convinced that your enterprise requires a great information architecture. Now let's look at how SharePoint and two of its very important concepts of taxonomy and content types can help you build a great IA for your organization. Anupam is now going to talk to you about what is SharePoint taxonomy and how to get started with it. Over to you, Anupam.
Thanks for that. Taxonomies can often be intimidating or be misunderstood. So I'd like to start with the basics. A taxonomy is just a hierarchical classification system. It provides a common way to represent concepts, show how they're grouped, and how they relate to each other with a specific hierarchical structure. More often than not, when you hear of a taxonomy, you think of the sciences, for example, the classification of organisms. And that's a great example. The taxonomy of organisms, with its different levels from kingdom down to species and subspecies, provides people across the world a common way to refer to the organisms that they're talking about. It also gives a clear picture of how these organisms are related. Looking at it, one can understand that a human is more closely related to an ape than to a deer and is hardly related to bacteria. But taxonomies are not limited to just the sciences. They're out there in the everyday world, and you've already interacted with them just without knowing it. Take an e-commerce site. If you've used a catalog of categories and subcategories to find the products that you're looking for, you've actually just interacted with the taxonomy. The structure of categories and subcategories allowed you to find the product that you're interested in, find alternatives or related products, and also understand how that product fits into the larger scheme of things that you're shopping for. That's the power of a taxonomy. Businesses also tend to use taxonomies. In today's world, with exponentially growing volumes of content, such as documents, videos, images, and more, managing that content is a nightmare. Taxonomies provide a framework for you to manage that in a consistent and ordered manner. Enterprises tend to use taxonomies to model their important metadata, such as asset types, organization structures, business groups, and more. For example, you can represent the fact that the internal audit team is a part of the finance department, which is just one of the departments in your organization, using a taxonomy. But let's talk about exactly how taxonomies help. Using a taxonomy to model your structures gives you company approved names for the concepts that you're referring to. You can also make those definitions richer by defining synonyms and descriptions so people understand the terms that you're defining. You can then make this common framework available across your organization and make your end users use them in the applications that they interact with. So whenever they create or manage a piece of content, they can stamp it or tag it with this one single name. This then boosts the consistency of your metadata. If your metadata is consistent and everyone refers to the same concepts with the same names, it improves the findability and discoverability of your content. You no longer need to think of all the different ways people may have referred to what you're looking for when you're searching or filtering for something. And if people in your organization can find and discover content faster and with ease, it makes them productive and makes your organization able to achieve more. Coming to SharePoint, there exists a taxonomy service known as the term store that allows you to define a collection of terms with different levels and properties and make those terms available to end users in document libraries, lists, and even Office documents. SharePoint's term store has the flexibility that allows you to meet your specific objectives. It gives you multiple scopes. You can define terms that are available across your organization and to all your sites, or limit them to particular sites based on your need. It also allows you to control who can add terms to your term sets. If your organization is multilingual, the SharePoint term store supports multiple languages. And finally, if in addition to having a rigid control set of terms, you also want to support free flow terms across your organization, you can choose to leverage the enterprise keywords feature. Using the SharePoint term store's capabilities, multiple organizations across industries such as finance, engineering, consulting, government, and more have improved their content management. Some organizations found ways to connect people and content to each other to boost collaborations. They achieved this by creating sets of terms that represented industries, sectors, or specializations and interests, and then had their users associate these terms with their profiles. This provided a mechanism for people inside the company to discover each other based on common interests and create working groups to collaborate. Other organizations were also able to create knowledge repositories that were organized by subject and quality. This was achieved by again creating internal professional networks using profiles and the associated terms, and also creating processes that indicated the quality and approval of those documents. Now that we've covered what the taxonomy is and how you can potentially use it, let's take a look at the SharePoint term store, its concepts, and how you can go about creating one. This is the SharePoint term store. You'll be able to find it under the Content Services option in the SharePoint Admin Center. Let's take a quick walkthrough of it. The first level that you'd notice is this taxonomy node. This is the term store level node that allows you to define the properties that apply to all the terms. The first thing you'd notice is that you'd be able to define administrators of your taxonomy. These administrators are people who will be able to control the entire taxonomy. You'll also be able to define multiple working languages and set a default language as well as other languages that are supported. We'll take a look at that shortly. You can navigate the different levels of hierarchy in your taxonomy using this tree. The next level in your taxonomy is known as a term group. The term group is the level at which you can set specific permissions and define group managers and contributors. Group managers are those who will be able to add other contributors as well as make changes to all the terms within this group, while contributors are those who can make changes to this group. You can also then go to the next level known as a term set. The term set is a logical grouping of terms that helps you structure the hierarchy within this term group. You can define an owner, stakeholder, and contact for a term set. These don't have any security implications, but are just a definition of accountability and responsibility. So whenever you view a term group, you'll be able to know whom to reach out to and interact with whenever you want to talk about this. There are other properties that you can set, such as whether this term set is open or closed. Like I mentioned, SharePoint's term store allows you to control who can make additions to this term set. You can control this property by either defining it to be closed, which means that only the group managers and contributors can add terms, or defining it to be opened, which means that anyone who can use these terms in tagging can also add terms into this hierarchy. Another property that's available at the set level is whether this term set is available for tagging. There may be instances where you're continuing to model your term set and is not ready yet for end-use consumption. At this point, you can define these term sets to be disabled for tagging, which then means that people will not prematurely use them. Additionally, if you're also using your term store to represent concepts that are not meant for association with content, you can disable this also. The other option that you'd have in the term set is to be able to specify a sort order. The default sort order is alphabetical. What that means is that the terms within this term set are going to be sorted either alphabetically, or if there is some information to be gained from sorting them in a custom manner, you have that control as well. One common example where this makes sense, if there are gradients or levels to your terms. For example, if I have company approved levels of sensitivity, such as highly confidential, confidential, and so on, their order matters, and I can choose to set a custom sort order. Next, I can go to the individual terms. For a term, I can see that I can define a translation, which is the default label, synonyms, which are other names for the same concept, and a description. These can be defined at a language level for all the working languages that I defined at the term store earlier. To edit an operation, I can select a term, select edit, and then make the changes that I want, such as changing the label, adding a description, or adding synonyms. If I have multiple working languages and I want to add more descriptions for those languages, I can choose to add them, where I will see the unadded working languages and I can define them. As you can see, if an end user who was working with German as their preferred language used this term, they would be able to see this translation. Again, as with the term set level, I can define the availability for tagging at a term level as well. There are basic operations that I can do for term set management, such as adding terms as well as updating a term. There are also advanced operations, such as pinning and reusing terms, which we will not visit in this session. Let's say I wanted to create a set of research domains, and these are going to be tags that represent the different areas of research that I can then associate with all the documents that are related to them. To do so, I select the term group, select add term set, and define the name of my term set. This term set is now created. I can define the stakeholders, who are people who have an accountability in maintaining this term set. I can also define if I want this term set to be available for user contribution or not. Let's say I do want it to be open. I can control that setting from here. Now that I've set up my term set, I can go about creating the terms within them. To do so, I select add term and I start defining them. Let's say my first topic is about integrated circuits. I can choose to create that. Let's add a couple more terms into this term set. Now that I've defined a few terms, I'd like to make some of these definitions richer by adding synonyms. To do so, I select the term's definition in the particular language, select edit, and add a synonym. These synonyms can be other names, abbreviations, anything that represents the same concept. Now that I've set up these terms, let's look at actually making them available to end users. Terms that you've defined can be made available to your end users by adding managed metadata columns to SharePoint lists or libraries. To do so, select Add Column, select More, and in this experience, define the column name that you'd like. In the column type, select Managed Metadata. The next important option to select is the term set settings, where you will select the term set that you'd want to associate this column with. So I want to associate it with the new term set that I've created, which is research domains. I then select OK. As you can see, the column is now created and available for users to consume. As an end user, to tag a document with the term, I select the document, select the details pane, and in the properties section, I can find the new property that I've created, which is research domain. If I know the term I'm looking for, I can leverage the type ahead suggestions by starting to type in the name of the term. If it was for the Internet of Things, you can see the suggestion appear. I can also choose to search for terms using the synonyms that I am familiar with. So if I'm used to calling it the IoT, I can do so. And by selecting the suggestion, it redirects it to the label of Internet of Things. This is how you can drive consistency with synonyms. If I didn't know the term I was looking for, I can choose to explore the available terms by selecting the tag icon, which loads all the terms that are a part of this term set. I can then save it, and that's it. I've tagged my content, as you can see here. Once tagged, metadata helps you find and discover content. So the filtering experience is now available, where you will be, for a managed metadata column, you will be able to view the values that are actually used in the list, or also navigate the full hierarchy to find the terms I'm interested in. Now that we've taken a look at what a taxonomy is, seen how to create a term in the term store, and also make it available for your end users, let's think about what we should consider while going about the process of building a taxonomy. The first step is to think about your information architecture. Depending on the approach you've chosen for your organization and where your content is stored, you may want to go with a global term if your content is across multiple sites and the terms are relevant across your organization, or with a local term for a particular site if your content is stored there and the term has relevance only locally. Another good idea is to use your objectives to plan your terms. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for taxonomies, and you'll have to use your intended objectives to help you decide what terms are relevant. A good idea would be talk to your end users who would actually use the terms and understand their pain points. What are they looking for? What terms do they keep searching for? And those can be candidates for potential terms. Another good idea would be to consider whether you'd want to represent organization and structure and important business processes and asset types as candidates for your terms, because they seem to have worked for other organizations. And finally, if you don't want to start from scratch, you can consider using third-party starter taxonomies and adapting them to your needs. A number of them are available online. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you attempt to create the most detailed taxonomy initially, you may have a tough time. It's a good idea to start small and iterate. Take a particular module, a particular set of terms, work on them, define them, validate them with your end users, and deploy them. As your users adopt those terms, you'll be able to learn from that feedback and use that learning while you define the next set of terms. If you also want terms to bubble up organically from your users, you can choose to crowdsource that with enterprise keywords and review those periodically to see if there are any terms that you'd want to consider making managed terms. And finally, for any taxonomy, you'd need to educate your users on the benefits of tagging so that they adopt those taxonomies. Even the best defined taxonomy is set up for failures if your users don't agree to tag those content. It also is a good idea to define default values where applicable and make their decision-making process simpler. But building a taxonomy is not the last step. Good governance can determine the success of your ongoing taxonomy efforts. In that process, consider defining owners and stakeholders and make sure that there is a clear accountability and responsibility defined. Another good idea is to define processes for change management. Organizations are fluid, and your taxonomy will need to evolve and adapt to keep reflecting that. But irrespective of the nature of the change, make sure that your process is robust. Consider a process for tracking all the requests that comes in. Evaluate them to identify the nature of the change, whether the terms need to be completely new terms or updates to existing terms, validating them with business users to make sure that they are correct, and then communicating it once you deploy them to your end users to make sure that they're aware of changes and adopt them accordingly. And finally, it's a good idea to keep visiting your taxonomy periodically to keep testing its relevance and making sure that all your obsolete terms are removed. With this introduction, I hope that you consider using taxonomies and the capabilities that the SharePoint Term Store offers to improve your content management. Sudha will now talk to you about enterprise document management and content types. Over to you, Sudha.
Document management, as the name suggests, is storing and managing documents required in business processes of your organization. This typically requires some amount of classification and organization for it to be effective and scalable. However, in enterprises, there's a lot more to consider before you set up a document management solution. It typically falls under one of the following categories. Storage. That is, where you want to store the document. Is it at a central repository for the entire company, smaller repositories per team, or do you want to store it by document type or the purpose of the document? The second consideration is organization. That is how the document should be stored, the categorization and the classification methodology that needs to be applied. Records management typically answers the question of how long the documents are to be stored. This is expected to be different based on document type and the compliance policies associated. Security and access control defines who can view and edit the document and also what are the roles and responsibilities associated with the documents. Tracking, simply put, is the understanding of how, when, and where the documents are to be used. Searching encompasses being able to find and discover and navigate through documents easily, and this is very critical. Finally, document management is also about processes and workflows associated with the document. SharePoint has a few different ways of managing content. Let's look at it through an example. Let's say your organization needs to store and manage all sales documents such as sales proposals, contracts, and invoices for all customers for every product sold for every fiscal year. You could do this using a document library with folders in it. You could start with folders per year and then go down to folders by product and perhaps folders by customer as well and store the documents within it. This works, however, if you had to say find all the contracts you signed with a particular customer for a particular product through all these years, it would be a daunting task to go through all the folder structure to find them. Alternatively, you could use metadata. Have a single document library and add all the columns and such as year, customer name, and document type as properties associated with the documents in this library. And we could also use your enterprise taxonomy and add metadata columns to add a little bit more structure to this library. This works very well for searching, filtering, and creating custom views if required. However, this approach may not work very well if you're trying to store different types of documents needing different properties to be stored together in a single document library. There is very little customization that can be done per document. Neither of these approaches have a consistent way of defining the structure of the document or the policies or processes associated with the document either. SharePoint content types help solve all of this. So what is a content type? Content types are a holistic set of custom properties that help define a content. These content types are reusable and are meant for business processes. A SharePoint content type is made up of metadata columns, templates which define the structure of the document, workflows which trigger the business processes, and compliance and security policies as well. So SharePoint content type is truly a holistic document management solution. It's easy to get confused between and use the terms file type, document types, and content types interchangeably. So let's disambiguate this before moving forward. On SharePoint, a file type refers to an application-based file type of the file, such as docx, pptx, and xls, and so on. Document type is not an official SharePoint terminology, but many organizations use metadata columns to classify the document as business process specific types such as invoices, proposals, etc. These are different from content types as a concept and feature on SharePoint. So now that is out of the way, let's look at how to set up and utilize content types. We'll start with creating a content. The first decision you need to make is whether the content type needs to be at a hub site level or at a site level. Based on this, you can choose to create it from the content type gallery on the SharePoint Admin Center or create site-specific content types from the site settings. The first thing you'll notice in the content type gallery is a list of existing content types. You can choose to reuse one of these by publishing it to hub site or create a new one. As you create a new content type, you'll notice that you'll need to choose a base content type to inherit from. A base content type allows you to create a foundation with common metadata columns and customize it further for more specific content types. So for our example of tracking customer documents, let me start by creating a base content type of sales documents, which in itself inherits from the system content type of documents. And we'll start building on top of it. Now that our base content type is created, you can choose to create custom content types for each type of sales documents. You can see that I've created master service agreement and invoice content types which derive out of the base sales document content type. I've also added custom columns for each of it. MSA has agreement start and end date, and invoice has invoice date associated with it. You can also see that based on the column type, you have advanced settings on and also the ability to manage and format the columns as well. You can also specify a particular template to be followed for invoices in your organization through the advanced settings. Optionally, you'd also be able to manage the policy settings such as retention, auditing, and MIP labels associated with this content type. There is also an option to manage the business process workflows such as review and approvals of content type. Now that these content types are ready to be used, I'll publish them to my hub sites. These content types are now available in my hub site and ready to be used. I'll create a new document library for sales documents. and add the specific content types through the library settings. I first have to allow management of content types. And now I can add from existing content types to this library. So let me choose to add master service agreement and invoice. So now these content types are available in this library. I can also add the custom columns I need to this list view. You'll see that the sales document and the invoice and the master service agreement columns are available in this edit view columns pane. Now, when I create an invoice or a master service agreement, it follows a specific template, policies, metadata, and workflows very specific to this content type. So as you can see, this template's opened up now. I've created an invoice now, and you'll also see that the metadata associated with it does not have any columns that are not specific to this invoice content type. So I have invoice date, fiscal year, and customer name showing up here. Now, the best part of content types is that it is editable. So you can continuously improve your organization's document management as required by your evolving business processes. You now know how to set up and use content types in your organization. But before you start, I want to leave you with a getting started checklist. Before you create a content type, understand as much as you can about the purpose of the document in question. Evaluate the content, structure, and understand who uses this document, how, and how often. Knowing this will determine if there is truly a need for the content type, or should it even be a new one or inherited from an existing one, and so on. Where should the document be stored, and the policies that needs to be set up can also be determined through this exercise. This simple template on the screen can help you with it. Once you understand the purpose, go through the content type checklist and ensure that you have the answers to all the questions. Determine what should be the scope and the hierarchy of the content type. Should it be local scoped, or should it be at a site hub level? What metadata properties are to be used? Associate a template wherever possible. Determine the business process workflows that needs to be set up and the compliance and security requirements for the document. Once you've gone through this checklist, you have all the information you need to create the content type. Let me remind you about a few best practices before you get started. First, evaluate if you need a content type. Would a folder or a metadata structure be enough, or would content types be the best option for your scenario? Remember, keeping things simple is keeping things efficient in document management. Next, plan your content types. The upfront planning with the checklist I shared with you will definitely be worth it. Create a base content type that can be your foundation. Being able to set up a hierarchy will reduce redundancy of properties and the effort. Use inheritance as much as possible. Remember, if the wheel is already invented, maybe all you have to do is customize it. Use meaningful content type groups to organize your content type so that others can find it and use it. You now have the modern content type gallery where you can manage all your content types in your organization. Use it. Finally, start and then incrementally improve your content type hierarchy. Remember, the best part of content types is that it is editable.
That's it. You're now all set to create a great document management structure for your organization. Anupam is now going to take you through a quick recap. Over to you, Anupam.
Thanks, Sudha. As we come to the end of the session, let's revisit taxonomies and content types. Taxonomies are a hierarchical classification system that enterprises can use to bring consistency to their metadata and improve their content management. This consistency in your metadata can improve the findability of your content because concepts are represented by a single name. The hierarchical structure also allows you to understand how concepts or content is related to each other and can boost the discoverability of content. And finally, this consistency and discoverability can improve your business processes and make your organizations more productive. Content types are representative of types of content for which you can define custom properties. These definitions are reusable both within a site and across sites. They allow you to organize based on your business processes. With these packages of content types defined, you can then specify custom workflows using Power Automate and use them as vehicles for implementing policies. With the possibility of adding templates to content types, you can also improve the standardization in the content that your organization generates. And finally, with the inheritance model of content types, change management is far simpler. Taxonomies and content types are powerful tools for you to improve your content management and information architecture. And organizations with great AI can reach the next level. If you're interested in learning more about the managed metadata services in Microsoft 365, consider checking out our deep dive session. If you're also interested in learning about Project Cortex, which brings artificial intelligence to improve your content services, do check out these other sessions that include an overview as well as a step by step of how Project Cortex is useful. And with that, we're at the end of this session. We hope you enjoyed it, and thank you.
Thank you and stay safe.